what you're going to do, but just takes.
If everyone could take their seats, we're about to resume. And we'll begin with the parties asking questions of the witnesses. IBEW.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I actually do have questions today. My question is for Chief Haig. The first question is, there's a water line and a sewer line that run parallel to line 132. There was work done to enlarge a sewer line, which also included pipe bursting in '08. So was the city not aware that that gas line ran there when they were doing that pipe bursting and the sewer enlarging?
The excavation of it, from what my understanding was, and I probably should defer that question, I don't have any knowledge, but that excavation didn't impact anything as far as I know.
But it did include work done around that transmission line,
And I can't
correct?
answer that as far as my knowledge, as far as if they saw the pipe or not saw the pipe.
So then my next question would be, what's the relationship in regards to communications between the Public Works Department and the Fire Department?
Well, the two departments have great communication. I just don't have, if there wasn't a reason to contact the fire department is my assumption.
My next question is, was the fire department invited to the trainings that were held in '09 and 2010?
Which trainings are you referring to?
In Exhibit 40, there's an invitation list.
The public liaison meetings?
Correct.
Yes, we did receive an invitation.
And did you attend at that time?
I believe my fire marshal attended the 2010 session.
And my last question is, the hydrants were dry at the time because there was no water supply after the explosion, correct?
Correct.
How long was it before you were able to get water to the scene?
Not giving an exact time, it probably took us 30 to 40 minutes to reroute some water. In the meantime, we ordered up water tenders to provide assistance for that.
Thank you. No further questions.
We'll move to CPUC.
Thank you. I'm Paul Clan, and I'll be representing the Public Utilities Commission. A couple of questions for Chief Haig. Chief, you were there the night of the incident. You arrived just a few minutes after the explosion and took command at the incident command center. Is that right?
Correct.
And you were there over the course of the evening, and you saw, and in fact, you ordered many of the events that happened.
Correct.
What was it like?
Well, in my 30 years, I've never seen anything like that. Obviously, San Mateo County has, in the state of California, uses their mutual aid system probably as frequent as anyone. But in our county, we have drop boundaries in our response plan. We have a central dispatch for fire. So ordering up resources, I think we had over 68 firefighters on scene within 22 minutes. So the response from both law, fire, public services was probably the most amazing thing I've seen.
And I want to get to the discussion that we had this morning about what you knew about the pipeline in advance. And in general, you didn't know much about the pipeline in the fire department. Does that also mean you didn't know where the valves were?
No, we didn't know.
Had you known that there was a gas pipeline there, or had your dispatchers known and your immediate first responders, what would have been different? The way I understand is that some of the early reports were that people believed that there had been a plane crash, for example. Had you known, or had your dispatchers known in advance that there was a gas transmission line through there, what might have gone down differently?
The initial report on the incident was a plane down, and those reports continued for the first 45 minutes. With the airport being as close as it is to this site, you know, we had thought that that was a possibility, obviously. Our response to the incident would not have changed, whether it was an airliner down or the explosion itself. I mean, our tactical dispatch and strategy would be the same, fighting what we saw, and then we're trying to adapt and control. I mean, that's the same mission it would be for anything.
If I could ask for an exhibit to come up, it's Exhibit 2BC. This is just a map of the subdivision that shows the fire damage. And I want to talk about what might have gone down differently had the gas been able to be shut off earlier. So we heard yesterday that there was a period of about an hour or so, that it took about an hour or so longer to cut off the gas that was coming in through both directions to the ruptured pipe in San Bruno on September 9th than it might have had there been remote controlled valves, for example. So roughly an hour or so, and not to hold you to that number. What I'm curious to know is what the impact of that hour was. You were nearby. I'm not sure where your incident command center was. I think it was just off this map. Is that right?
Actually, it's at the top of San Bruno Avenue in Glenview, which
Or just below this map?
it's going to be at the lower end above
Yeah.
State Drive.
Yeah. So very close by here. And just to situate the folks here, so the purple shows fire destroyed properties, the yellow shows damage, and then the green undamaged, I think. Do you happen to know what those black bars mean? I don't know.
On this map, I believe they're security gates.
Security gates, okay. And the valves that
Madam
actually...
Chair, this is a little off topic, and we're talking about a lot of speculation.
Let me ask the question, Chair, and then yeah, please do tell me if it's off topic. My basic question is, in terms of public awareness, since the fire department didn't know about the valves and didn't have the capability of closing the valves, what impact that had, and whether advanced knowledge might have changed the situation on the ground that night. And I'm perfectly happy to take that offline if that's not appropriate here.
Mr. Clannon, it's fine. We think we're on topic. If you could just speak up a little bit and ask a specific question to the chief.
If the gas had been turned off an hour earlier, what effect would that have had that night?
Again, we've been instructed by Madam Chair not to speculate. And in my honest opinion, I would be speculating. Obviously, we had the initial explosion. Without the fuel supply, there's a possibility we could have been, instead of in a defensive mode, an offensive mode. But I couldn't tell you what impact that would have.
So it
using
might
that
have been
map.
beneficial, yeah, but yeah, and I certainly don't want you to speculate. Thank you.
Okay.
And my time is up. Thank you.
Okay, just so the parties and the witnesses are clear, it's perfectly fine to ask questions that are factual in nature. The witnesses are experts in their certain areas, and that's why they're here. And so we do want to ask questions where your qualifications can actually shed light on them. We just want to keep the questions factual in nature, and so perhaps if you word something like what damage might have been done in the 30 seconds or first 15 minutes after the response, given your experience as a fire official, that might be something that's in your purview rather than speculation. So just if we can help the parties, if you have any questions, we can get through that again. I know PHMSA, PG&E, and San Bruno all have witnesses on this panel, so we'll go to PHMSA first.
Great, thank you very much. I have a question for Chief Haig. First of all, I'd like to applaud the efforts of you and the rest of your team out there in helping protect the community, but would like to just solicit your ideas on how can we collectively, whether it be the emergency response community represented by Mr. Narva and others, or whether it's the industry or the regulators, get the attention of local officials, including emergency responders, prior to a failure. We will see a lot of efforts that will be going out, but as a couple of people have said, the communication has to go two ways. It's not meant by any means as a criticism. I know you have your hands full on a daily basis, and if you don't have a history of failures, how do we get your attention prior to a failure? Welcome any ideas.
Well, if the awareness isn't any higher right now. I'd be very disappointed if it was, and on the fire side. So I think the opportunity to jump on that awareness opportunity, I'm sure the fire service would collaborate, hopefully in much greater effort than it have been, but I'm in, put it that way.
My next question then, hopefully leading off to that, would be to Mr. Narva. And I'd just like to ask Mr. Narva, have you gotten much feedback or recognition for the Pipeline Emergencies program? And again, maybe just to connect to the Chief's thoughts, your ideas on how we can get the information that's already been developed more rapidly into the hands of emergency responders.
Sure. The Pipeline Emergencies, as I mentioned in the earlier session, is a program that's been around for about 7 years. It's continually evolving. We are now just finishing up the second edition, and part of that second edition is to make it electronic. I alluded to that briefly. Going to deploy it in an electronic portal so that it is available to any emergency responder at their convenience, their time, and also do it in a way that's measurable and trackable so that we know how far they've gone in the curriculum. We can measure learning. We can measure the communication, the awareness, and then to couple that with a communication piece so that whether it's the National Association of State Fire Marshals or a pipeline operator has the ability to electronically communicate with emergency responders and also to track that. So technology will get us a long way, I think.
Great, thank you very much. I think I still have a couple of minutes. I'll open it up to anyone's comments on this one, but it's having myself been involved in public awareness for a number of years, one of the things we're constantly struggling with is the difference between awareness and behavioral change. You know, awareness is the first step, you know, and I just welcome any thoughts, you know, and Carl, we've had this conversation ourselves about how do you, once you gain awareness, how do you get people to change behavior? 811 is a perfect example. People know you need to call before you dig. They will be aware of it and still not do it. So just anyone who wants to swing it that way. You know, not having the opportunity to sit across from Carl that often, maybe we could point to Carl and ask for his thoughts.
Well, I think the key to building upon awareness to actually get to actual behavior change really results from really drilling down and looking at the incentives and barriers for people to make those types of behavior changes and addressing those. And that's something that I think that we all need to work on harder. Some of it even goes to the previous question about just who's doing the communication. You know, we have Chief Haig now who could be a great communicator with other people in the fire industry, more so than receiving that communication from PG&E. They might be more receptive to hearing from him. The mayor from San Bruno could communicate with other local public officials, and I think that would be one way to help open the door up to move things towards behavior change.
I might want to add, Jeff, that, I mean, Carl had a good description on how you emotionally communicate to people and if they're receiving messages or not, and basically what kind of mood they're in. First, when they see it, they tend to have a different mood, and all of a sudden you get into that section where they're actually hearing the message. And trying to identify how we can get to that event where they're actually hearing it rather than having dread or ignoring the messages is really key.
Thank you. PG&E.
Yes, thank you. My questions are directed to Mr. Resendez. Earlier this morning during the technical panel discussion, you had started to discuss what is covered at the public liaison meeting and the responding to gas and electric emergency seminars that PG&E puts on. Do you care to complete your thoughts?
Sure. Let me just make sure this is in the right place. Yeah, the public liaison meeting is intended to increase partnership and coordination among the local group and the local emergency response community, whether that be the fire or police chiefs or the Office of Emergency Services located in that local area. The kinds of things that they cover are reviewing and looking upon those various incidents which have occurred to understand what might have been learned, as well as go over various aspects of gas and electric infrastructure. It is high-tech, if you may, at its basis, and is very complicated. And there is certainly a level of understanding that we want to convey around that infrastructure. But I think most importantly is the communication, the two-person communication that occurs, as well as providing them contact information. For example, our designated 911 number for the emergency response community exclusively, and allowing them and letting them understand how that looks and feel when they make that phone call into our dispatch.
Do you care to cover what you handle on your gas and electric emergency seminar information?
In general, we've had 22 classes so far across our service territory. We've had in excess of 700 attendees, police, fire, 911 dispatchers, Homeland Security, safety professionals. We've had other operators come to these, as well as public works departments. Feedback has been extremely positive. What we cover are, the foundational issues. What does the infrastructure look like, both gas and electric? What kind of hazards might be encountered, step and touch potential, why pinching off the line or stopping the flow of gas could be a potential issue. We talk about transmission level issues. We actually hand a handout out that includes the evacuation distances for various pipe sizes and pressures. And then in follow-up, we even provide them all of the resources that were used to build the class. Most of these are free and available for them to go and access online or actually order the books and materials that are being provided.
Thank you. One further question. Earlier today, we talked about new technologies and new opportunities to educate the public on the location of gas transmission pipelines. Can you talk a little bit about what PG&E has done in that regard?
Sure. I also mentioned that we had a lot of meetings with public officials. I'd like to call up a slide, Exhibit 4Y, and why that's going up. Just a couple of comments. It was mentioned a little bit earlier, the National Pipeline Mapping System has been usually the go-to point in a variety of communications, whether it be the affected public officials, or emergency responders. What we did is actually incorporated a map within our website that allows the user to type in any address, whether it be their home, their business, or a family member. What you're seeing right now is actually a localized map that's available through their My Account feature, that being, the feature you go in and log into to pay your bill, manage your energy. But it also includes a map just like this one. It gives about a 2-mile radius around the home, so it actually gets down to the street level. So the individual in that spot, if you may, would be able to know specifically where these pipelines are located. Beyond that, we've also designated an 888 number if people are wanting additional information for which they can get that information as well.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
We'll finish with the City of San Bruno.
Thank you. With that exhibit still up, I have a quick follow-up question. Is that the scale, Mr. Resendez, is that the scale at which that map is currently available to members of the public?
Yes, it is. That if you were to go and log in today into your My Account, you would see that map as it exists, just for your place.
At the scale that it showed?
That's correct.
Okay. Ms. Robertson, in your opinion, is the federal map system, the online tool that's available both to the public as well as to emergency responders, in your opinion, does that provide an adequate level of information for preparedness to first responders?
I believe the information that is there is adequate, especially when it's coupled with the other information that is available by working directly with the pipeline operators. We are continually working on our NPMS and revising it and issuing upgrades to it. So yes, I believe it is adequate, especially if you couple it with the other outreach efforts.
Question for Mr. Lydiak, Mr. Boss, Mr. Weimer, and Ms. Robertson. Have any of you specifically evaluated the effectiveness of PG&E's public awareness program relative to regulation API number 1162?
I can talk to that. The Inspection Enforcement Authority for PG&E is the California Public Utilities Commission. So the inspection would be done by that agency. Originally, when the pipeline operators first completed their public awareness written programs, there was a clearinghouse, and the clearinghouse reviewed all of the requirements that are in 1162 to see how the written programs aligned. The feedback from that clearinghouse review was sent to the California Public Utilities Commission, and any additional inspection activity that would have occurred between that time and now would have been done by the California Public Utilities Commission.
I just mentioned, because PG&E does participate in our papers program, they were part of the surveys done for that region, and that data would be available to the company.
I'm sorry, I don't think your mic's
Yeah.
picking up.
There we go. Because PG&E does participate in our papers program, they were part of the surveys done in that region, and that information would have been presented back to them as part of their records for their program. We would not have looked at the individual data. We would look at aggregate data for the industry.
I would add that one of the purposes of the trade association is to share information among their
Please
members.
pull the microphone just a little closer.
One of the functions of the trade association is to share information among members, be they regulatory efforts or workshops, so there would be an informal feedback mechanism as lessons learned from individual companies back and forth depending on the trade organization we belong to. And in some cases, we'll invite outside parties to help in those discussions.
Yes, and just quickly, we haven't done any specific evaluation. Those public awareness programs are not available to groups like ourselves or to the public, so it'd be hard to evaluate them. Although I think the ultimate evaluation is what we heard after the San Bruno tragedy, that people had no idea.
Thank you. Mr. Narva, you mentioned earlier that more pre-event communication is desirable, and I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit about how you believe pipeline operators can improve their public awareness programs, particularly as it relates to information available to local emergency responders about the location, operating characteristics, and hazards posed by pipelines in their communities.
The importance of having that communication before the incident can't be understated. We, in past years, have focused on a state-by-state approach of bringing together the emergency responders, pipeline operators, state and federal regulators, all of the stakeholders, so to speak, and trying to facilitate those communications and understanding what one another does, what their role is, and what resources they have. That's something that we need to replicate far more frequently and on a state-by-state approach, as well as at the local level. You just can't replace that face-to-face communication and understanding what the other party has, how they can help.
Great. If I might just take another couple of seconds for a question to Chief Hague, a two-part question. First, if you could clarify the situation that was raised earlier regarding the dry hydrants, I believe was the word. And then secondly, I am sure that even in your 30-year career with the fire service, that you might not have imagined being before the NTSB in a proceeding such as we are here today. What are you looking for as a result?
I'm sorry, was there a question regarding the hydrants?
If you could just clarify the statement that was made earlier about dry hydrants.
About the water main being blown out in the explosion.
Correct, that was the
And that was
answer.
the reason for the, correct. Responding to your second question, I do want to thank the NTSB and the technical staff for giving us the opportunity to be here and participate. my belief is there's players in this room that can, has the ability to see that something like this doesn't occur again. Whether it's through legislation, regulatory training, safety measures, technology, so that this does, no other community has to suffer the consequences that we did in San Bruno. Thank you.
Thank you.
Member Summerall.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this has been a very informative panel, and I want to thank all of the panelist witnesses for being here. The only other pipeline accident that I've been involved with was one in Carmichael, Mississippi, about 3.5 years ago, and I was on scene there. And then, of course, it came to the board about a year later. I noticed there, and I just went through the report this morning, that in that particular case in Carmichael, Mississippi, which is really in an extremely rural community, we had difficulty even finding the place. One of the callers to 911 immediately knew that it was a gas explosion. So here's a very rural community where the residents knew that it was a pipeline explosion. They knew there was a pipeline going through the community. The sheriff immediately knew that there was a pipeline. He even knew that it was a liquid propane pipeline going through the area, as did the assistant chief of the county volunteer fire department. So, Chief, this question will be directed to you. I noticed that Mr. Narva said that pipeline information was available to meet the needs of fire departments on the pipeline disasters, but of course he represents the National Association of State Fire Marshals. I suspect that you interact. Do you interact with that organization, or do you more interact with the National Association of Fire Chiefs, or both?
Our immediate division is the California State Fire Marshal's Office. In California, the CPUC has regulatory on gas line transmission. Our State Fire Marshal Office typically deals with liquid transmission lines. But I think, as you indicated, I said earlier, I have been on the National Association of State Fire Marshals website and actually have downloaded some of the scenarios and programs.
I want you to speak up a little bit. We're having people coughing and pictures taken and all that, and I'm an old jet pilot and I can't hear. So grab that mic and speak loudly for me.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I had mentioned earlier that I had been on the website with the National Association of State Fire Marshals and actually have downloaded material from that program and actually put it on our training curriculum.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Narva said that it's the responsibility of fire departments to seek out information about pipelines in their areas, and do you agree with that statement?
Yes, I do.
I'm curious then, what is the particular reason why San Bruno Fire Department was not aware that there was a transmission pipeline going through the middle of San Bruno?
We didn't have the information. We didn't have maps of a pipeline going through. Obviously, you know, we've heard today that there is a system that we can access, and I just didn't know about it, to be honest with you.
And I appreciate your candor, but the statement that you agreed with was the one that said that the fire department should seek out that information. And so I just wanted to understand better why that information wasn't sought. Are you personally a PG&E customer?
Yes, I am.
So is what I'm understanding is that they do mail out public information material in their monthly bills?
I have seen it in the billings.
What exactly does that material say? If they're mailing it to you and you're not aware of it, what is it that they're sending out? Is it saying there's a pipeline going through your area, or what exactly is it saying?
I don't live in San Bruno. I live in another community.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Okay, thanks. Mr. Weimer? So whose responsibility is it to find out that if there are pipelines in your community? Is it if you're a citizen, should you be aware? If you're a first responder, should you be aware? If you're the gas provider, should you make people aware? All the above? What's the answer to that?
Well, I think it's a shared responsibility, and you can't really expect people to go out and look for something if they don't know it's there. So I think the industry has a real responsibility to try to get that information into people's hands, but it's certainly a shared responsibility on everybody's part. I think as the locations become known and as the emergency response plans get shared with fire departments and local emergency planning committees, that type of information will flow out from both ways.
Thank you. It's a shared responsibility. So when I was on an airport commission years ago, we talked about people that would complain about airport noise, and we said, well, they should be aware of what they're getting when they buy the property. I don't think that ever went anywhere with the state legislature, but I'm wondering, has there ever been any thought to a disclosure on a real estate contract or something to make people aware? I don't know. I do not know if there's a pipeline going through my neighborhood. I don't know that. That's my own lack of information there. I do know there's a railroad track going there because I can see it. But has there ever been any thought to disclosing information like this on a real estate contract?
There certainly has been thought to that, and the Pipelines and Informed Planning Alliance report that just came out a little over a month ago has a recommendation in there to move forward from state to state, because I think it has to be a state-by-state thing to put that type of disclosure, so at least people that are buying property in proximity to pipelines would have that awareness when they purchase homes.
Thank you very much. And as you've said earlier, awareness, or someone said earlier, awareness is the key to this. Madam Chairman, thank you.
Member Weiner.
I have a question for Mr. Resendez. Is PG&E a interstate or an intrastate carrier?
It's an intrastate. Our facilities are located.
So where do the requirements for public awareness come from for an intrastate carrier?
They're also inside the RP 1162 document.
Pardon?
RP 1162.
And 1162 is based on federal standards?
It was the recommendation, yes. It references back to 49 CFR 192.616.
So is the onus then entirely on the carrier for public awareness, or are there other stakeholders?
It actually allows for, and we do look for opportunities to partner with other operators in our service territory for which we may have mutual interest in reaching out to communities.
Mm-hmm. So then to follow up on Member Simwald's question, in a sense, is are the emergency responders also responsible for public awareness in a sense, for their own public awareness?
I think so. We've had firefighters in my class for my children, so I know to some extent they're reaching out in the local community. Does that answer your question?
Okay, thank you.
Member Roskine.
I just want to begin, Chief Haig, I know you're joined at the hearing with Sergeant Caldwell from the San Bruno Police Department. The two of you are representing all the first responders, and I want to make sure that we get a chance to acknowledge and thank you for your response on September 9th. It's after these tragedies that we're always reminded that there are people that run toward them on our behalf, so we thank you for that. This is a test for the whole panel. I think there's been an interesting conceptual discussion about public and first responder awareness. I want to make this very concrete. So this is a test. No grade, but it's a test. All of you, point to the fire exits, please. That's good. There's multiple ones. Thank you. Mr. Weimer, if the fire alarm actually goes off, what would you do?
I would head towards the closest exit right there.
Walk or run?
I would probably walk because I don't want to trip over the 4 people in front of me.
Thank you. This whole conceptual discussion about awareness really gets down, and I think the technical panel and FINSWA, the questions have tried to go to this. Really, the objective is knowledge, action. And all the surveys, response rates, et cetera, don't get at any of that. So I'm sure all of you are familiar that before the meeting started, those exits were on the screens up here. And then the chairman gave you specific directions, so you could point to multiple ones. The challenge is, do you have the knowledge? You all seem to pass that. The next is, do we know the action? Walk, don't run. The third part, of course, is what happens when the alarm actually goes off. And that we can only test either through a scenario, practice, or during an actual disaster. And I bring this up because my question really is, on the public side as well as first responder, is there any program or activity that has been demonstrated to actually address knowledge and appropriate action? And you get extra credit if anyone's actually shown that that translates into people knowing what they're doing. On the public side, that means I smell gas, do I know where to call? I'm excavating, do I know what to do about that? First responders, where's that information coming from? What do I do? It's knowledge and it's appropriate action. Do we have any information, any data, anything that shows there's something effective going on now on the public or first responder side that we're dealing with this effectively?
I think on various parts of the program, there are measurements out there. The Common Ground Alliance has a reporting system called DIRT, and it tries to look at the accidents, analyze the accidents, and ask those kinds of questions if the people knew what was going on. There's an attempt on this program for public awareness, first to understand if there's an awareness, but during accident investigations, that is some information that's gathered on how effective it is. And
More? We still got a couple minutes here. More?
Yes, in Washington State, because of the Pipelines Informed Planning Alliance document that recently came out, we've had an effort for the past year in Washington State to try to engage local public officials about planning near pipelines. And through some of those very targeted efforts, we've got, I think, 4 jurisdictions now that have passed ordinances that use their zoning and permitting processes to help people stay safer near pipelines, and a couple other jurisdictions that are moving that direction.
I think with respect to damage prevention, it's a little bit easier to measure because we can measure calls to 811 after a campaign. In many cases, we could measure damages per 1,000 locate tickets. It's more difficult to measure behavior after an event, what to do if you smell gas. But I do know of some operator programs who have campaigns where they measure understanding and intended behavior. If a customer would smell gas, then they run the campaign and take the same measurements. So there is some effort going on out there.
So I guess my emphasis is on trying to focus on that objective, because while you're measuring survey rates and the people got mailings, and you can count on the fact that after this hearing, I'm going to poll all my colleague board members to find out what they've gotten in the mail and if they read them or not, right? So just because we don't know something's there, after tragedy, it's easy for all of us to say, oh, we should have paid attention. So I think we really need to focus on the knowledge and do they have the action. I think there's a lot of examples with responses in San Francisco Airport. You do this all the time. Let's see if people really do walk or run. We can measure that kind of stuff. But that really has to be where the focus is. And I just want to raise a concern that if we're just focusing on the mailing and did they get it or not and did they read it, et cetera, what we really want to know is do they have the right knowledge, or do they have the knowledge to take the right action? Whether they do that or not is another thing, but we got to make sure that's the part that's getting So I think there's almost a misnomer about awareness because we're all aware it's not good. And the final comment I would just make is this is hard to do, but they're models. You know, we work in transportation safety. Work on getting people to click it, fasten their seatbelt, not drink and drive, and prevention's even harder, right? So there are models, though, I think that this industry could take from other places to make sure that you're at least using the most effective mechanisms possible to get the best outcomes that you want. Because we don't want these tragedies and then just wondering whether people got the mailing or not. We want to know that the first responders and public had the information they needed to take the right action. Thank you.
Vice Chairman.
Thank you. I would like to second Member Rosekind and certainly what the chairman has already said about the amazing response of the first responders. I was there on the scene, and so I witnessed it, and I heard the story of the truck turning the corner and the heat cracked the windshield. I mean, that in itself tells what kind of environment these people were subjected to, and they did an amazing job. So I would like to second that, what the Member Rosekind and the chairman have said. My question relates to 1162, and excuse me if I've missed this in the course of the proceedings, but it's not clear to me. Maybe it should be addressed to Mr. Lydiak for API and Ms. Robertson from PHMSA, but it's not clear to me whether this is a recommended practice from API or whether it's also a requirement that was made a requirement by PHMSA. So what is the status of 1162 in the industry?
In 2005, PHMSA incorporated by reference the API 1162 recommended practice, and operators are directed to develop and implement programs that align with the baseline and supplemental requirements or recommendations of 1162.
So the regulation elevated it from a recommended practice to a requirement, I take it?
Yes, in many ways, yes.
Are there any metrics to determine whether this requirement is being met, and what kind of follow-up has PHMSA had?
Yes, we have an inspection program underway.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Chief, I'm going to start with you. Did you have any delay in accessing any of the victims or the survivors or protecting public or private property?
Madam Chair, did you say delay?
Yes.
No, there was no delay. And our emergency medical response or conservation.
Okay, how long did it take you to get to the victims or survivors?
I'm trying to count. I believe 5 of the victims were deceased, and we had 1 self-transport, 2 self-transports, but there was no delay in getting to them as far as they were out of the residences, so we had access to those transports.
Okay, so the fire didn't prevent you from getting to anyone?
No.
Okay, how about public or private property?
Well, obviously, the fire prevented us to get to some of the properties. You mean undamaged properties? In this scenario, I guess I'm having a little hard understanding, is the size of the explosion and the ensuing ball of fuel was pretty much established its own perimeter. And from the heat, we could access only so close to any point in that perimeter. So that was essentially our limitations of gaining access there.
And once the gas flow was stopped, were you able to access inside that perimeter?
Once the flow was stopped, yes, we were able to get in there. We were still fighting structure fires, and obviously we were still waiting for the residual pressure to be shut down also.
And how long did that take once your folks arrived on scene?
I believe it was another 20 minutes, I think, for the residual to be shut down. Now, some of those areas had to be done manually, so there was probably certain areas they could have accessed a little easier if that wasn't impacting the operation.
When you say 20 minutes, are you saying 20 minutes from the first 911 call or
No,
20 minutes
no,
from?
I'm sorry. I thought you were referring to the residual.
Okay, no, I'm
No.
talking about the initial fire in your arrival on scene. How long did it take you to access inside the perimeter? Were your teams watching for an hour, or what was going on?
The valves were shut off about an hour and 20 minutes after.
So your teams arrived on site?
Yes. We
How
set
long
up-
after the original night?
Set up our perimeter, did what we could with what we had, essentially contain that perimeter. We did have firefighting activity being done on structures who caught due to exposures and radiant heat. And then it was probably an hour and 20 minutes before the main valves were shut down, and then main fuel source went down, and we were able to advance on the perimeter.
Okay. Mr. Jones, can you please pull up Exhibit 4A? I'd like to follow up on Mr. Trainer's question to Mr. Resendez having to do with public awareness. And RP 1162 establishes guidance for operators to develop, manage, and evaluate public awareness programs. And Mr. Trainer asked you a question about evaluating the effectiveness of your public awareness programs, and I understand that you contract out the evaluation portion of that. And there was a little bit of a discussion about the response rate and that they had mathematical models. Do you remember that?
I do.
Did you feel like you got a good response rate on your evaluation?
I do. You know, again, we're participating in the API-sponsored paper survey, which is the Public Awareness Program Effectiveness Research Survey. We participated in 2007. Now, I'm not a statistician, but it's my understanding that that particular survey, as executed, was designed to get a representative sample such that you'd be able to scale that to that population.
Okay, Mr. Jones, if you could pull the exhibit up, and this is the exhibit for the group responsible for this, the Survival Factors Group Chairman Report, and go to page 18, please. And right here at the bottom, it talks about your effectiveness review. Paradigm Alliance conducted a program effectiveness review in June 2010. They mailed public awareness brochures with business reply mail survey postcards to over 15,000 addresses. 8 weeks later, 20 survey postcards were returned. So if you could go to the next page, please, Mr. Jones. And here's a summary of some of the responses that they received on your behalf. And these were all mailed to people who actually are located near a pipeline. And so do you or someone you know work or live near a pipeline? More people said no than said yes. Have you seen information about pipeline safety within the last 2 years? And earlier in the document, we talk about all of the mailings that are done twice a year through the bills and things like that. 14 of them said no, that they had not seen information, and only 3 had. The great news is everyone would call 911, and unfortunately, I think this kind of shows what we have problems with excavation. Have you or anyone you know ever discovered a buried pipeline while digging? And 17 people said yes, and so maybe these people who were responding to this postcard self-selected because maybe they actually had a problem. And have you ever heard of the one-call system before reading this brochure? And only 2 people said yes, and 14 said no. And so I think I think 20 responses out of over 15,000, to me, does not say that you had a good hit on your evaluation program. I'm not sure if Mr. Weimer or Ms. Robertson want to comment with respect to what the expectation is for evaluation and effectiveness, but I think even the 20 people who did respond demonstrate you've got serious problems with people being aware of what's going on around them.
And you're right, Madam Chairman, I will not disagree that there was a real learning opportunity in the responses that we received. I think what's important here is what was mentioned a little bit earlier, that one of the things that utilities are encouraged to do is to actually develop materials that are compelling and informative and that have a tone and a language for which the audience speaks as opposed to utilities speak. And in those responses, and just so we're clear as to what we did, the business reply card that was used there was to test the actual content. Not an effectiveness survey such as the paper survey, but an effectiveness survey, if you may, of the actual effectiveness of just that individual piece. And getting 20 responses when you have 15,000 recipients was unacceptable to us. And it caused us to step back and really ask the question, you know, what are we doing wrong with respect to notifying and informing and raising awareness? Clearly the language needs to change. And so we will be engaging our corporate communications group, who has particular expertise in these kinds of areas, to completely reformulate, if you may, the information in there. And I think, too, when you look at the business reply card, and this is kind of an industry technique, is, you know, what are you really offering in return? One of the things that I think we really missed in that particular piece was we didn't give the customer some benefit of letting us know that information. We said their opinion was important, but maybe they had additional questions. Maybe they wanted to get additional information. So we're looking at opportunities to improve, if you may, the techniques that we use to be able to kind of entice, and that was mentioned a little bit earlier, or prompt that kind of response.
Thank you. We'll turn back to the tech panel if you have some additional questions.
I have one question for Mr. Resendez. During the session where the parties were posing questions to the panel, you brought up Exhibit 4Y, which was a Google map showing the location of pipelines in the San Bruno area. When was that diagram or map placed on your website or on the internet?
Shortly after the San Bruno incident.
All right, what type of comparable information was available through the internet or other public sources prior to the accident?
The National Pipeline Mapping System.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, technical panel has no more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chatra. How about the parties? Are there any parties who wish to ask additional questions? Okay, we'll go to CPUC first.
Thank you, and this is for Mr. Resendez. Is there information, speaking just about first responders now, not about the general public yet, is there information about the pipelines through an area that PG&E would choose not to give to first responders, either on your own hook or if asked?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again?
Yeah, is there information about a transmission line, for example, through a neighborhood that PG&E would choose not to give to first responders for any reason?
Not that I'm aware of.
And similarly for the general public, is there information about pipelines through my neighborhood that PG&E has that PG&E would not feel comfortable giving me?
Not that I'm aware of.
And the reason I ask this, and I'll just ask you if you want to expand on that answer, is that particularly since the San Bruno accident, of course, people in Northern California are concerned just not about whether a transmission line comes through their neighborhood, but whether it might be an old one or one that is similar to the one that ruptured. So PG&E would feel comfortable providing local people with specific information about the pipelines?
Yeah, in fact, we have a 888 number that was set up because we were receiving a lot of inquiries. Customers wanted to know, and we wanted to provide information. And so we set up an 888 number. We received thousands of calls on that individual line. And for those more complicated questions, maybe kind of the ones that you're inferring, those actually go through a process whereby experts, if you may, who have particular specialty in the ability of being able to get those answers, will send in writing to those customers those various responses.
Thank you, and that's all I had.
Thank you, Mr. Clannon. PHMSA.
Thank you very much. Ms. Robertson, I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about what the federal regulations require in regards to liaison with emergency responders, emergency response plans, and maybe a recent advisory on that subject.
Yeah, our regulations have long required pipeline operators to liaison with emergency responders, not only in our public awareness requirements, but 192.615 has to do with emergency response plans. They have a responsibility to reach out to the emergency responders, to explain, that the pipeline is in the area, the characteristics of release, how to respond, how to get more information, to have contact information. Recently, I believe it was in November of 2010, we issued an advisory bulletin reminding operators of their responsibility, their liaison responsibilities for emergency responders.
Great, thank you very much. Chief, and just want to make a, forgive me, minor rhetorical comment. It was, in part, we all look to learn from tragedies like San Bruno. Our administrator, following that, directed us to reinforce the message with the industry that they have a positive requirement to maintain liaison with emergency responders. I think we all believe that's crucial. Just a real quick question, because I think it needs to be in the dialogue as we talk about maps. I don't know if there's anyone who wants to comment about the National Pipeline Mapping System. There was a compromise reached after a number of years of talking about what level of accuracy, who can access what. I don't know, I mean, Carl, you were as involved in that as anyone. Would you care to address that?
Yeah, certainly the availability of the NPMS system is one of the few ways that people can really find whether there is a pipeline in their neighborhood or not. We just need to get the word out more that that is available. There may be some user-friendly issues with that still, because I get calls all the time from people that have tried to access that and can't quite figure out how to get in there, or they get to the first page where you have to have a password, and they can't figure out how to get past that. But it's a wonderful system once you do figure it out. And I know after the San Bruno tragedy, I think the NPMS got so many hits that it was overwhelmed, and we put a link on our website, and our website went down too because there were so many people looking for that information.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We think it's a crucial tool too. What I was trying to get to was there are security considerations. So the compromise that was reached after 3 years of negotiation with Homeland Security and everyone was to get it at a county level or lower, and not to allow people to zoom in and out that could be used for other purposes. I know there are a million opinions on that. I just wanted to get it on the record. And then lastly, for Ms. Robertson, during your inspections of public awareness, obviously effectiveness is what everyone's after. It was really part of the original recommendation from the NTSB, as you noted, from Lively, and I think also an accident in Carmichael, but in Kansas as well. And they ask us, and we built that into that standard, which is now incorporated, but how do we look to see if a company is actually learning?
That's what the inspection process is all about. What we want to find out when we go out and meet with these operators and conduct our inspections is, number one, what does their program say? Is it aligned with 1162? Number two, do they implement it in accordance with what they've written, what they've said they're going to do? Have they taken the measurements that are required? How did they go about each of the different audiences and each of the messages? How did they measure it? What was their methodology? And what did they learn from it? You know, you can have the measurements, but you need to evaluate it. What have you learned from it? And what have you done? Or what are you planning to do to make changes to your program? Public awareness is a continual improvement type regulation. There's a 12-step process within the regulation that outlines to operators what they should do to improve their programs. And as we continue to do these inspections, we'll learn what's working, what's not working with respect to the regulation and the standard, and we can make changes accordingly.
Great. Thank you. Just rhetorically exiting, I'll say if I had a response rate as you did in PG&E, Mr. Resendez, I'd be thinking about whether that tool was effective. You know, or maybe there's another way of implementing that tool to see whether that's effective, but clearly that sort of a response rate is not helping. So, thank you.
Do we have other requests? PG&E?
Yeah, Mr. Resendez, could you please clarify what the 2007 paper survey was?
The 2007 paper survey was an opportunity for us to gain a baseline understanding and awareness level for the various populations, be it the affected public, excavators, as well as emergency response professionals and public officials.
Can you clarify what the 2010 tear-off mailing was all about?
It was to assess the effectiveness of that individual piece. Was the language, the tone, the messaging being understood by the individuals who physically were receiving that material.
And that is the survey, the 2010 tear-off response was what you're responding to in terms of the number of responses we received?
That is correct. That's the 20 responses we got as part of that business response card.
Thank you.
City of Sanford.
Yes, I just have a follow-up question regarding the questions a moment ago from PHMSA having to do with the National Pipeline Mapping System, and I believe I'll ask those both to, the question to Mr. Relendez and Ms. Robertson. Given that the scale of that map is, and the security considerations in the previous discussion that was referenced earlier, suggested that the scale of that map should be at a fairly high level. I'm told that it is 1 to 24,000. What tools are available to a member of the public who might wish to drill down, if you will, a little bit further? Somebody who's actually very anxious to get more information, where would they go? Either within PG&E or for Ms. Robertson, where might they go in general?
With respect to specific location information about pipelines, the NPMS is the source. We have, on our stakeholder communications website, there's a lot of information about the pipeline safety program, about the regulations, about specific operator pages, from mileage to enforcement actions. We have a wealth of information about damage prevention, public awareness, the PIPA program that just came out. So although there may not be more definitive information about the location of the pipelines, there is a lot of information about the pipeline safety program available on our website. We also do a lot of outreach. Our CATS program certainly is key to getting out to the public, and another opportunities, any other opportunities that we have to reach out to the public, we try to take advantage of that.
The map that's located within the My Account function, I believe, is at a much closer view and gives a 2-mile radius. Also, PG&E is participating in a new program that was developed by the Pipeline Association for Public Awareness. It's an online module that allows people to identify pipes near them. I think what's really, we're trying to take advantage of technology, so it'll also have kind of an iPhone or a Google-based phone application that will allow you to access that through your browser and be able to find major pipelines that are located near you. It'll tell you the direction, the distance. It'll tell you what product is inside, the various hazards associated with that, response needs if there's a leak, and contact information for the operator. So we are looking at additional opportunities to be able to meet that need.
Thank you.
Member Weiner.
Well, just a comment. I just pulled up the National Pipeline Mapping System, and the public map viewer doesn't work.
Actually, I just pulled it up a few minutes ago, and it did work. So PHMSA, don't have a heart attack. I actually was able to use it. I know that there are some confusion, some places that look confusing, almost like you need a password for it. There is a public way to get in. So I'll show you how to find the pipeline in your neighborhood.
We'd like to commit to fix that page, so.
Member Roskine.
Operator error, obviously. Just a quick question. I'm curious, in terms of first responder knowledge, prior to September 9th, what information was available between PG&E and San Bruno, both police and fire, regarding any information that would help facilitate coordination of a response?
Well, my understanding. Am I on? Thank you. No?
Sometimes you have to get pretty close to the mic.
Am I on? Okay, there. Now, yeah, my understanding is we're know that PG&E uses the incident command system, and the fire service has used this command system for a long time. And my hope as we progress into the next phase and our outreach program is to look at those response plans and merge our plans between the two agencies. So there's a point of contact that you know, in an event like this, we can make a one-step call and make that contact and have someone in authority who can make decisions quickly and speed up the entire process of the emergency response.
And so just to be clear, does that point of contact, before September 9th, was that point of contact clear and had those communication lines for a coordinated response been worked out?
No, not at this time. But I do want to say that on the September 9th PG&E's response was great. We had liaisons established, and it worked out. I think there was an opportunity to enhance that, and that's my goal.
Thank you.
Vice Chairman.
Thank you. I already spoke to the amazing job that the first responders did as first responders, but I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the city of San Bruno and all of the agencies of San Bruno Fire and Police and the others for facilitating the investigation, as well as they did for preserving the site, for accompanying us wherever we had to go to do what we needed to do as investigators, for feeding us, for providing us places to meet, for facilitating the media interviews, all of the things that you did to help this investigation go as well as it did. I wanted to thank all of you and congratulate you for a job well done.
You know, yesterday we had an opportunity to discuss some of the SCADA activities and the 911 calls and things like that. I just wanted to ask Mr. Resendez if there's any post-September 9th collaboration between you and kind of what goes on in the SCADA Center. If they're relying on someone from PG&E to go on scene to kind of give them feedback for what happens, and yesterday we were told they don't call 911 if they see something, an anomaly at the SCADA Center. Has there been any changes to that post-accident?
That is actually an active conversation, very timely question indeed. Thank you. Yeah, we're actually, one of the things that I think kind of typifies, an incident that occurs, whether it be on the distribution side or a much larger scale accident like happened in San Bruno, is that oftentimes, because of awareness among the public, that when something occurs, their first call is usually 911. So it's typically the situation where they're the first responder of all the first responders. Now, going forward, yes, they're actually they're looking at our policies and our procedures at exactly that very issue to assess when is the appropriate time to make that phone call, who should be making that phone call, because obviously we have first responders out there who go and make an initial assessment, whereby the need of having the fire or the police department present there in order to secure the area is essential. So we are absolutely looking at that.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Robertson, can you please talk about some of the improvements that we saw before and then after three-digit dialing was instituted as far as public awareness for one call?
For 811? Yes, the Common Ground Alliance does a survey, I believe it's every 2 years, to get an understanding of the awareness level for 811. And although it's not where we would like it to be, we are seeing constant improvement in the awareness of the responsibility to call 811 and the availability of the number.
Okay, so what we know, though, is before we had three-digit dialing, we had more excavation events than we did after we did three-digit dialing, 811, and community awareness campaigns. So what I'm trying to understand is we had a success in that area where we were actually able to change behavior and get information out, and people actually acted on it. And so those excavation damage accidents have been going down. What created the catalyst or the success in seeing that be effective and that communication be effective? And can we translate any of those lessons learned to the general public awareness side?
The 811 campaign is largely a grassroots campaign. It's done through the materials are available through the Common Ground Alliance, but they're distributed at the grassroots level through various organizations. So it's about getting the right message to the right people from the right source. I think Carl talked a little bit about that. As far as overall awareness, there are many other messages besides damage prevention and calling 811 that we need to convey. And that can be a bit of a challenge when you're trying to convey so many different messages to a given stakeholder audience.
Okay, great. Mr. Resendez, I wanted to ask you if after the accident, and I don't know how much, what the cover and the reach is for PG&E, is it reasonable to expect a PG&E employee to make personal contact with each and every fire chief in your service area? Is that realistic?
I think at a local level, where say our maintenance and construction operation, that would be, the other first responder on the scene, that those are two-way communication channels that should be maintained and encouraged at the local level. Absolutely.
Okay. And I did want to follow up, I did use the mapping tool that's on PHMSA's website, and I think this is one of the challenges, because I think for people, if they don't know that they need to look for something, or that they should look for something, or how to look for something, they're not going to look for it. And so these pipelines are buried, and I think I'm a little bit unique, and I'm probably hypersensitive to these issues more than your average consumer. But there is a transmission pipeline that runs through my neighborhood at the top of our street in our community. And really, the primary reason why I knew that is because I saw the yellow poles sticking out of the ground with the disc on them. And I know what those are, because I've worked in the transportation field for almost 20 years, and I've worked on pipeline issues in particular. But most people don't know what those are. Most people don't even know what they're looking at. And so I know that along that right-of-way, there are those markers. But I have to tell you, there's been a lot of acquisitions and mergers over the years, and so when I went to the PHMSA website just now, I didn't even know who the name of that transmission line operator is, because it's not the distribution line that provides the gas to my home. Washington Gas provides gas to my home, but the transmission that runs through our neighborhood, the transmission line, is actually Dominion, and I didn't know if it was Dominion or another name when I went to look. And so I did have the opportunity to go to the map and look at it, but I have to tell you, your average consumer isn't going to go do that. They are not going to know in particular that it runs through. But Member Sumwalt, I do think that if you have a right-of-way running through your property, you are going to have that disclosure when you go to settle on purchasing property. But that doesn't mean that I will. I live in that neighborhood, and I don't have necessarily the pipeline located on my right-of-way, but it's near me, and I wouldn't necessarily know that. And so I think it's a real challenge. If I got a mailing from a company called Dominion, and I didn't know what pipelines were, I probably would throw it in the trash before I even opened it, because I think it was junk mail. I mean, I do open my Washington gas bill because I know that they should be mailing something to me. But I think it's a real difficulty, and this goes to the issue that Member Rosekind was saying. There's information presented, but do people get it? Is it coming in? Are they internalizing it? Do they understand? And so I know our team is very interested in this issue. We've had a great response from our panelists, and we thank you very much for your participation. And we look forward to continuing to work with you as this investigation proceeds to draw on your expertise. I think we will have some specific comments or questions for the record, and particularly for Mr. Resendez, but given that our time is short, we want to keep on schedule. We'll potentially file those in writing for you. Okay, thank you very much. The second panel is excused. Thank you for your service, and we'll take a break for lunch, and we'll come back at 1 o'clock.
It's a long morning. Well, he survived. Well, it sounds like he's got more for you.
Welcome back, and we will begin with our fourth panel on federal and state oversight. Ms. Ward, if you could please swear in the witnesses.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. For the record, the witnesses are seated right now, and they're standing up on their own. Okay, so go ahead and swear a minute. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please be seated. For the record, I will state the name of the witnesses at the table. We have Mr. Dennis Lee, Mr. Richard Clark, Ms. Julie Halligan, Ms. Linda Daugherty, Mr. Zach Barrett, and Mr. Paul Metro. We'll start with you, Mr. Lee. If you could please state your full name, title, and a brief description of your duties and responsibilities.
Good afternoon. My name is Dennis Lee. I'm a senior utilities engineer at the CPUC. I've been with the CPUC since December of 1999, and my duties and responsibilities at the CPUC is to supervise the gas engineers in the gas safety section at the CPUC.
And Mr. Clark.
Good afternoon. My name is Richard Clark. I'm the Director of the Consumer Protection and Safety Division at the California Public Utilities Commission. My job is to influence and implement policy within the Commission with respect to natural gas, electricity, communications, freight railroads, passenger railroads, rail transit, and rail crossings. I have a bachelor's degree from San Diego State University in history, political science, and sociology. I've been with the Commission since the energy crisis in 2000.
And Ms. Halligan.
Can you hear me now? Okay. My name is Julie Halligan. I'm the Deputy Director for Consumer Protection and Safety Division of the California Public Utilities Commission. I have all the non-rail programs in CPSD. That includes utility safety, gas and electric, as well as electric generation performance, transportation enforcement, and consumer fraud. I've been at the Commission for about 19 years. I've been in this position for 4 years. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in finance.
Thank you. And Ms. Daugherty?
Good afternoon. My name is Linda Daugherty. I'm the Deputy Associate Administrator for the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration's Office of Pipeline Safety. My group includes the program development, engineering, regulatory development, enforcement, state programs, and training and qualification. I started in the regulatory business about 20 years ago. I'm a chemical engineer, and I started as an inspector and accident investigator for our central region. So I've been in a while.
And Mr. Barrett.
Good afternoon. My name is Zach Barrett. I'm the Director of State Programs. I have the responsibility of the performance evaluations of state programs and distributing the associated grant funding with that. I've been with the organization for 23 years, working on 24 years. I've been an inspector. I've been a senior project engineer, leading our gas integrity management regulation development. I have been the enforcement officer, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate in the hearings today that you guys are giving us.
And Mr. Metro.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Metro. I'm Chief Engineer of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission's Gas Safety Office. I've been with the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission for about 26 years. Today I'm representing the National Association of Pipeline Safety Representatives as the Vice Chairman.
Thank you. And Madam Chairman, the witnesses have been sworn in and qualified, and they're ready for Mr. Nicholson to question them.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ward, and welcome back to Mr. Clark. We had a hearing on the Metrolink accident in Southern California a few years ago, and I understand how the breadth of your responsibilities goes across many activities and areas. And thank you for coming back after having participated in a hearing in the past.
Thank you,
And,
Madam
and
Chairman.
WMATA.
Right.
That's right.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so Mr. Nicholson, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Lee, I'd like to start with you and discuss the state and the integrity management audits that were performed on PG&E. If you would, could you tell us just overall how an integrity management audit is performed for a natural gas operator?
Basically, we would use PHMSA's gas protocol forms, their IM protocol checklist. Basically, it's about 168 pages long, and it covers about 14 areas, which basically covers the entire IM program. And we would conduct these audits using that protocol, going through the checklists, and reviewing related procedures, records, project files pertaining to their program. And throughout, usually it's about a 2-week audit with about 4 engineers. And once we complete the audit, a report goes out, as in 2 of those exhibits, and we wait for a response from the utility company, and we review their response, and we close out the file if we agree with their response.
Okay. What are the 14 areas that you discussed?
Okay. Pardon me, I'm gonna just. The 14 areas are identifying high consequence areas, baseline assessment plan, identify threats, data integration, and risk assessment, direct assessment plan, remediation, continual evaluation and assessment, confirmatory direct assessment, preventative and mitigative measures, performance measures, record keeping, management of change, quality assurance, communication plan, and submittal of program documents. And those are the 14 areas.
Okay. And during those interviews, are you, or those audits, are you actually interviewing persons?
Yes, yes, we are. We interview individuals or groups.
And what sort of things do you go over with those individuals?
Basically, we go through the checklist that covers these different areas.
Oh, so while you're filling out the checklist, you're actually interviewing the persons that are responsible for that?
Exactly, yes. And if I may add, we also interview the individuals or groups, and we review their programs and procedures pertaining to the areas.
Okay, you say 4 groups?
Or groups, or...
Oh, or groups,
yes.
gotcha.
Sorry about that.
How exactly does the CPUC evaluate the operator's self-assessment of their integrity management plan? Is that a checklist process? Can you elaborate a little bit on how you look at the operator's ability to assess their integrity management program for effectiveness? What do you look at in that area?
One of the requirements is they go through a continual evaluation of their program, and they have their own, there's certain rules requiring them to have effectiveness, either digs or other things, and we review that to make sure they are doing what they're required to do.
Were there any findings related to the self-assessment of the integrity management program for PG&E in 2010?
Well, we had an area of concern where a contractor, they hired a third-party contractor to review their risk management plan, to review their ILI process and their ECDA process. And the consultant found some areas of concern. So PG&E went ahead and remediate those issues, and we left it at that.
Okay, so their self-assessment was hiring a third-party consultant?
One of many ways for them to do that.
And what years were those?
The self-assessment, it was 2007 for one of them, and then 2009 was another one.
And the finding was then that PG&E was not responsive to those?
Yes, they weren't as responsive. However, they did send a response, and we're still currently reviewing their response of the third-party findings.
And how long do they have to respond to a finding from a third-party consultant?
There's no written rule. It's just doing it in a timely fashion, basically.
So, also in this audit, you looked at risk management. I believe that was one of the 14 areas.
Yes, it was.
Can you discuss the findings from 2010 in the area of risk management for PG&E?
There was just maybe minor procedural issues where they had to maybe incorporate more into the procedures, strengthening certain parts of the procedures. I don't have the exact details.
I understand. Were annual reviews looked at of their program?
By PG&E?
Yes. Yeah. Is that something you would audit?
Yes, we'll
Okay.
look at that.
And was there any finding in the area of whether they were reviewing their plans on an annual basis?
No, there wasn't. I don't believe.
I want to go back a little bit now to the 2005 audit. If you could tell me on the 2005 audit, were there any findings against PG&E for their integrity of management?
Yes, there were some issues found.
And that was that a joint audit between yourself?
Yes, it was 4 individuals from the CPUC and 1 individual from PHMSA.
And what were the findings?
Again, same thing, procedural issues. There was one issue where 80% wall loss, they had classified it, they didn't classify that as immediate. However, by the end of the audit, they actually revised their plans and procedures that they would state that if it was an 80% wall loss, they'll consider that as immediate finding.
Okay. And so they corrected that when you were on site?
Yes.
Do you know where the wall loss was on the findings in 2005? What areas, what segments?
I don't know.
Was this line 132?
It wasn't.
So when going through the threat assessment or the risk management plan, RMP1, did CPUC have any views with regards to their selecting the top 10 threats?
No, we didn't have any comment on that.
Is that typical? Have you seen that with other operators, that the risks are categorized or sequentially listed and then just taken as the top 10 for action? Or is that something where there's a fixed threshold for risk?
Sorry, I'm not really familiar with that part.
There's no notations, no findings as far as how they're ranking the riskiest pipe segments in their system?
No, there was no issue with that.
Okay. So you talked about the check sheet. Is there anything else that the CPUC does in evaluating the adequacy of the threat assessments identified in the risk management plans?
No, we basically rely on the PHMSA checkoff list, and there's also guidance material that's part of that too.
But now you get into the plan itself, right? I mean, you're looking at the actual weightings and categories?
Yes.
Okay, and there was no findings, no concerns in 2005 or 2010 on the weightings used?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about exception reports and how those are used by PG&E?
Oh, yes. In the 2010 audit, we found issues where PG&E had used exception reports more frequently than needed. Exception reports should basically be used when they can't meet a certain time frame or certain things that they can't do. However, they were actually using some of these exception reports to basically keeping from them to do certain procedural things that they were required to do.
What sort of procedural things?
Things like, let me just look at my notes real quick. Things like using an exception report for basis of not excavating or examining certain indications found, which are required to do.
Okay, so if they found an indication that it should have been a dig, they would take exception to that?
Yeah,
Okay.
because of certain reasons they couldn't get to it.
They could not get to it, so that was a reason to take exception to actually digging to confirm?
Well, they actually delayed the response. They delayed examining the dig for beyond the 90 days.
Okay.
So, but they did.
So the exception report was for a delay?
For delay, yes, for
Okay,
delay.
so it was not an immediate?
No, it wasn't immediate, no.
Now, you said they were also using exception reports for some other procedural matters. Can you elaborate, or is that the extent?
That was pretty much it. A lot of delaying certain things, like excavating all the schedule anomalies within 365 days. Instead, they took 27 months.
Okay, almost over 2 years.
Yeah.
Can you speak up a little bit too?
Oh,
and
sure.
speak
Sorry
into
about
the
that.
mic? Thank you. So as part of the audit in 2010, did the PG&E Integrity Management Plan review include a review and documentation of their pre-1970 pipe and how it was established with the maximum allowable operating pressure?
They may have. I'm not sure.
You did not specifically review sections of the pipeline that was pre-1970?
No, we didn't.
Okay. And that's not typical of an audit, that you go in and actually look for pipe that may have been grandfathered?
Not for this audit in particular, because the data, basically the data that's in their PG&E's GIS is populated through their pipeline survey sheets, and we didn't get into in depth as looking into their purchase orders or their vouchers for the different pipeline information to verify that the information in their pipeline survey sheets were accurate.
Right. Now I'm speaking more, not so much about their survey sheets or their GIS necessarily, more so pipe that would not have been hydro tested. You don't go back, pipe that falls into 192.619A3. You don't look for verification or documentation as to how that pipe was categorized?
No, not for this audit.
Okay. And then you were just talking about the GIS database. Would it be typical for your audit to go in and look at where they had assumed values?
Yes, we do.
You do. And was there any finding, either in 2005 or 10?
No, there wasn't, because if they didn't have the data, they would use conservative values for those data.
And they were using the correct conservative values?
Yes.
Okay. Is that a spot check, or do you actually?
A spot
go-
check. Basically, these audits, all our audits are randomly sampling of records. We just don't have the resources and the time to look over every single record.
Okay. And you said there were 4 of you on that audit, right?
Yes, there was.
So is it 4 of you reviewing that same documentation, or you split up?
Different. We split. We look at different projects, different lines.
So you did look at the GIS data, at least on survey sheets.
Some of it, yes.
Did you audit their process or procedure for populating the GIS system?
We may have. I'm not sure.
Can you speak a little bit about how much training a CPUC auditor might receive?
We usually, for us to be qualified integrity management inspectors, we go through 2 courses that are offered by PHMSA, and they are Gas Integrity Management Protocol course, and also the other course is called Safety Evaluation of Inline Inspection, which is ILI, or Pigging Programs courses. So that's 2 courses we take. And also we take, there's 7 web-based training that we do for the IM course. That's also offered by PHMSA.
Okay, and the Gas Integrity Management Program training, what does that cover?
That's what, that's exactly what was for the previous one that I mentioned. Those were for the IM training.
For auditing?
Oh, IM auditing of IM programs?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
those are the
so
four things.
It's not how it's executed. Can you tell me what kind of formal training? Is there a degree requirement for auditors?
Yes, engineering degree.
Okay, that's all I have at this time. I'll pass this on to Mr. Chatre. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions for Mr. Clark. And what I'd like to do is, maybe if you can tell me what factors are considered in determining the audit frequency for operators, not just PG&E, but California utility that you are regulator of.
Well, excuse me. At my level, I'm not really involved in the planning of the auditing. However, what I do know about it, the two folks on both sides of me probably know more about that than I do. But I do know that we do more than just integrity management audits. We do GO 112E audits. That's the general order that the state of California instituted back in 1960 with regard to gas safety. We audit mobile home parks. We audit propane facilities. We audit the distribution facilities. We audit the transmission facilities via the integrity management audits. And we basically, our approach in the past has been to be able to touch every aspect of a utility's operations as frequently as we can and in as much depth as we can. We have a statutory requirement on the mobile home parks that we inspect all 2,800 of them at least once every 5 years. The rest, there are no statutory requirements for the inspections of the other facilities. We do that as our resources allow.
Can Mr. Lee or maybe Ms. Halligan can answer that?
In terms of the audit frequency, can you hear me?
Yes.
Basically, we decide how frequently to audit.
Actually, I don't think everyone can hear you too well. If there's any other mics that are live up there, just make sure that they're turned off. I heard a little bit of feedback, but maybe we can get your mic turned up a little bit. Try again.
Okay.
Oh, this is better.
We have for the PG&E system, they have about 17 distribution, forget a district or division, and about 11 of the transmission units. And we audit each of them, depending on whether it's distribution or transmission. We'll audit distribution every 2 or 3 years. Transmission, we'll try to do it, again, every 2 or 3 years. We'll audit a unit more frequently if we're finding, if we're having significant findings or a higher number of findings in previous audits. So we'll be looking at areas of the operators that might require more frequent inspections. For the Sempra utilities in the south, SoCalGas and San Diego, they each have one distribution and one transmission unit, and we'll audit those once every year. Typically, that's our goal. But again, we do it as frequently as we can given our resources, and we try to increase them when we see something that necessitates increasing the frequency of the audit.
Thank you. I was really focusing more on integrity audits, not all the other audits, but you answered them all.
Oh, okay. On the integrity audits, we've done the 2 for PG&E and I believe the same number for the Sempra companies. We'd like to do them more frequently, but we haven't been able to at this point.
Ms. Doherty, can you tell us, has FEMA found any inconsistencies between the state audit programs and the integrity management plans of their own?
Can you hear me? Okay.
I think I'm okay.
I understood your question as asking if the federal inspections are revealing different findings than the state inspections. Is that correct? Okay. I would say that universally we are finding similar issues across the country. We are finding during our integrity management reviews that operators perhaps are not doing as robust an assessment, risk assessment. We're finding that there are areas that are requiring changes and improvement, and that we are going to be partnering later this summer for a workshop to address those very issues. There are changes that need to be made and improvements that need to occur.
And does PHMSA require the state auditors to conduct the audits with a certain minimum frequency?
We do not determine the specific frequency. That would be based on the state's allocation of resources and priorities and risks. One thing that was mentioned was that there are a variety of different types of inspections. Integrity management is one of many. So in a state where you have a lot of construction, you might be doing more construction. It varies.
And again, for the clarity of all the witnesses, I'm not going to specify, but all my questions are really directed to integrity management audits. So if I don't mention it, just assume it's for integrity management. Now, how do you, how to put it, to what extent PHMSA reviews the findings of the state auditors?
We review them at a very high level. State and federal inspection results are loaded into a database, and so we look at those results by allocating them into buckets so we can do some trend analysis to analyze the type of thing I just reported, that risk assessment is an area of more work. So we do some aggregate. It's not detailed review at the state level, except during our annual reviews we may go into it in more depth.
Thank you. Mr. Metro, can you very briefly discuss the purpose of National Association of Pipeline Safety Representatives?
Yes, the purpose of the National Association of Pipeline Safety Representatives, sometimes referred to as NAPSR, is to have a group. We represent all the lower 48 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. Our purpose, our mission is to provide information on pipeline safety, to represent the states on pipeline safety issues with PHMSA, and basically to promote pipeline safety throughout the country.
As our chairman described in our opening statement, there was a rash of accidents this last year, both in liquid and natural gas. What are the NASPR's views in terms of integrity management regulation? Does the NASPR believe that it should be more prescriptive than performance-based?
NAPSR's position on whether the performance-based approach is working is that we need to see some studies that PHMSA needs to prepare from the data that they are collecting. IMP has been in the works for about 9 years, and we haven't seen any studies as to whether performance-based measures are working or if we need more prescriptive regulations, maybe in some areas. We need to see that study. We need to start mining the data that we're gathering for IMP and take a look at that. Maybe we need to make some adjustments. We believe as a group, the NAPSR group, that the IMP document, the IMP regulations need to be a breathing, dynamic, adaptable set of regulations, and we need to make some changes to make that happen.
My time is almost up. I'll just ask you a last question. Does NAPSR believe, do we have time to conduct a study?
Yes, I believe we have time. We need to do it now, though. We need to gather the data and start investigating where we need to make changes, if we need to make changes.
I'll pass it on to Mr. Bob Trainer.
Mr. Clark, you indicated you're not specifically involved in the assessment of the integrity management program. Did I understand you correctly on that? What functions do you fulfill within CPUC? I just want to make sure the questions I ask you are appropriate.
Sure. Pardon me. Again, my job is to influence and implement the policies of the commission. So I interact with the executive director, the chief counsel, the chief administrative law judge, and the commissioners in terms of influencing policy. In terms of implementing policy, my job is to guide the organization in the direction of the vision and the culture that we have developed for the organization. With respect to integrity management program itself, I rely upon my deputy director and program manager to take care of the details of that and to report to me any issues that they have with regard to the implementation or the findings that we're finding in that program.
And if your staff did come to you with some kind of report of issues, what would your role be then?
My role would be to go to the executive director and to the commissioners and to other folks and to try to change the policy or to institute either a rulemaking or an enforcement action. I have the enforcement staff within the commission also.
Does the commission receive any federal funding?
It does, yes.
Are you involved with that process?
I review the documentation of the audits that are done each year by PHMSA and sign off on them and kick them up to the executive director.
Are there any conditions on the funding with respect to the commission's performance or their own self-evaluation?
Certainly. There are numerous categories of performance that PHMSA looks for with us, one of which is our staffing levels. The other is a number of inspections that we're doing, and I'm sorry I can't recall all of them at this point.
And I assume the funding's determined by how well you do or how much you need to improve?
It's how well we do.
Okay. And how has the commission fared in recent years?
Well, for the last 4 to 5 years, we have received 100%, I believe, is our score.
One of the things that we wanted to explore with the commission was we know that it has multiple responsibilities, one of which is rate setting for utilities within the state, including natural gas operations. And secondly, the pipeline safety program for state operators. How many people are employed by the commission?
Commission has about 1,000 employees.
And what number or percentage of these employees would be dedicated to the pipeline safety program?
All told, currently we have 13 inspectors, 2 supervisors, so that's 15, probably 20 PYs directly, PYs being personnel years. About 20 PYs directly involved, and then there would be involvement across the commission in terms of administrative law judges and attorneys for enforcement actions and rulemakings and commissioners and commission staff. So I'm sorry, I'm not
Okay.
including the folks in the Division of Ratepayer Advocates. I'm also not including the folks in the Energy Division who work on gas. So I'm going to say somewhere around 35 people, maybe 30, 35 people.
Let's try to put a box around the pipeline safety division. The enforcement and oversight of pipeline safety programs. Would that be just the 13 inspectors and 2 supervisors?
2 supervisors, program project supervisor, and a half of a program manager, third of a deputy director.
Okay, so are we dealing with 15, 20 people? Is
About
that-
20 people.
Okay. What percentage of the funding for the commission is directed to the pipeline safety program, enforcement program?
I don't know the answer to that. All of the federal funding that we get is definitely dedicated to the pipeline safety program.
Would you confirm that number for us, please?
Certainly.
I would like to explore with you for a minute how the rate-setting responsibilities of the commission work with the pipeline safety responsibilities of the commission. On the surface, there would appear to be some inherent conflicts there. Would you expound on that, please?
Inherent conflicts? I'm not sure what you mean by
Well,
that.
for example, would a pipeline operator approach the commission for a rate increase in order to fund a capital improvement project?
Ms. Halligan is much more of an expert in this regard than I am, but generally speaking, the utilities come forward to the commission in a gas accord case or in a general rate case, and they ask for a certain amount of money with regard to their gas operations, and the commission approves it or denies it or modifies the request, issues a decision on it, and the expenditures are then not tracked.
All right, well, maybe I should redirect that question to Ms. Halligan then. Your mic, please. Your mic.
Try again. Can you hear me now?
Yes. The question was, the rate-setting responsibilities of the commission seem to be, at least on the surface, at odds with the pipeline safety responsibilities. The commission, on the one hand, I think I would guess that there's pressure to keep rates as low as possible because of consumer or public desire for low energy. And on the other hand, there's got to be enough money to fund the pipeline safety program. So if the commission is the sole body with those responsibilities, how do you resolve any conflicts between those two needs?
Well, when the operators come in and file for their gas revenue requirement and rates, there are several interveners that those cases are assigned to an administrative law judge, and other parties can intervene. One of the interveners is the Commission's Division of Ratepayer Advocates, and their primary responsibility is to make sure that rates are just and reasonable, and to look closely at the utilities application for revenues and rates to review that. The Utilities Safety and Reliability Branch, we don't participate directly in the rate cases. We'll provide advisory support to the ALJ or to the Energy Division that's reviewing the rate case. We'll also provide technical support to the Division of Ratepayer Advocates if they're reviewing a particular part of a utilities application that has to do with maintenance and operation expenditures or capital projects, and they want to know what we think of it or whether it's reasonable. Staff from DRA has periodically in the past come to the Utilities Safety Group to ask for an opinion on what we think of particular projects. But in general, there are any number of interveners that can participate in the utilities rate case. CPSD isn't one. And those
excuse me for a moment. Your acronyms, you're going to have to explain them for me. What's
I'm
DRA?
sorry. DRA is the Commission's Division of Ratepayer Advocates.
And the second acronym you just used a moment
Consumer
ago.
Protection and Safety Division. I'm sorry, I refer to them as CPSD.
Okay. have you ever had an instance where an operator has come to the commission for a rate increase for the sole purpose of improving the integrity or the condition of its system, and was denied a rate increase?
Well, when the operators come to the commission for rate increase, they're either coming on the, for the distribution revenues, they're going into a general rate case application. For the transmission costs, they file those currently as part of a gas transmission and storage application. Those applications cover backbone transmission, local transmission, storage operations, and customer access charges for those groups. So when the utilities file rate cases or for those costs, they're covering all the costs to provide those services to their customers. They're forecasting the rates for all of those areas. And
Okay, hey,
they're-
I'm sorry,
ahead.
my time's running out, and I do
Sorry.
have one question to ask Mr. Metro. It sounds like a very involved process, and perhaps the commission could provide us with a more detailed explanation as how the setting of rates is done in the context
We'd
with
be happy to.
pipeline safety needs.
The point I was going to make is that there's a lot of costs that are covered in that one application, and safety, reliability projects, those type of projects are only one part of a much broader application.
I'd like to address the last question to Mr. Metro. Mr. Metro, do you see these types of problems occurring in other state utility commissions in the country?
Specifically, what type of problems?
Well, the rate setting responsibilities conflicting with pipeline safety programs.
There has been a tremendous pressure across the nation to keep rates low. And I can specifically speak to Pennsylvania, that we went through a restructuring process in the year 2000 and essentially came out of the gas restructuring process with rate freezes for anywhere from 7 to 10 years. And during those rate freezes, there was a lot of pressure on the gas utilities to save whatever revenues they could, and at times, pipeline replacement was one of the areas in which they decreased.
Okay, so there is a little bit of a conflict there, at least from your experience.
Yes.
I wish we could have more time to explore this further, but we do have other topics we wish to address, so I'm going to give this back to Mr. Nicholson.
I want to talk a little bit about MAOP, grandfather clause. I'll start with you, Mr. Clark. I'm curious, does the CPUC trend what % of interstate natural gas transmission lines have maximum allowable operating pressures established without conducting a hydro test?
We have not in the past. We certainly are now.
Right. So there was no trends up till this point. And I'll ask Mr. Metro as well, if NAPSR has a position on non-hydro-tested pipe, pre-1970 pipeline, and what kind of risks you think those might pose?
Yes, we do have a position on that. After lengthy discussion with the NAPSR group, part of the issue with the pre-1971 pipes, especially the pipes that are non-hydro test capable, is the lack of information that we have on those, lack of records, and even when we have records, if we can trust the findings that we find with the records. So we would look at it and say, this is an area in which we would like PHMSA to review and take a look at reducing the MAOP for lines that are pre-1971 that cannot be hydro-tested and that the records are suspect. So we would look at a 20% reduction at the MAOP level.
And you say that's been communicated to PHMSA?
Not yet. We're working on that.
I see. You know where my next question was going to go.
Yeah.
And in fact, it is going there. We do have an exhibit. It's 2CT, Ms. Doherty, and it it shows that 60% of the nation's natural gas transmission lines were installed prior to 1970. And I'll ask a similar question to you that I asked CPUC, that does PHMSA track what percentage of this pre-1970 pipeline had an MLP established under 192.619A3?
No, it does not. That's something we may revisit.
Mr. Metro, when do you expect to get back to PHMSA with that information?
We'll speak to them in the near future about it.
Would it be possible to get a copy of any documentation that you provide to them?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Arty, yesterday there was discussion from PG&E's integrity management team suggesting during panel 2 that they might have a pre-1961 D-cell weld problem on line 132. And I just wondered, that was the first time I'd heard of anything like that. Is PHMSA exploring this, or is this a matter that PHMSA is going to take up?
Well, definitely. Any seam issue is obviously of concern to us. And when we find information that could tell us that there's a problem out there or could be systematic or widespread, we're going to research it and see if we have data to support it. We also, I mentioned a risk management or risk assessment workshop. We are also having a workshop on seam issues to explore that very kind of issue and find out what is out there and what we need to learn more, and then we'll take some action.
When is that workshop?
Right now, I believe it's targeted for July.
And has PHMSA seen any data that would indicate there was a seam issue?
On DSAW, I am not aware of any.
Okay. Mr. Clark, I'll ask you the same question. The DSAW issue that was mentioned yesterday, is that something that CPUC feels needs further research?
Yes, it is.
And has CPUC seen any evidence of that sort of problem in the past on other lines?
We have not that I know of, that we've seen any issues with regard to DSAW pipe. However, one of our first actions following the incident was to have all the utilities locate all of the 30-inch DSAW pipe that they had in their systems and that had not been hydro-tested, and reduce the pressure by 20%.
And Mr. Lee, I'll ask you also, yesterday there was an explanation by PG&E's integrity management team regarding the practice of running their MAOP, or running up to MAOP every 5 years. I think that was the frequency. Can you tell me, was that explanation accurate as to why they do that? Did you hear that discussion?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was that an accurate
Yeah, that was accurate,
explanation?
what
It
they
was.
were saying, yes.
Okay, so it sounded to me as if by not running it, their line up to MAOP, that they would suffer a decreased operating pressure every 5 years. Was that how I understood that? Was that correct?
Yes, if it goes, if they bring the pressure up every 5 years to that, let's say, for example, they have a maximum operating pressure of 300, and and they have an MAOP on that line at 375. And in the 5 years preceding an HCA or the preceding 5 years, if they don't get up to the 375 value, then if they do, let's say in the last 5 years, the highest pressure that they ran on that line was 300, and they've been operating at 250 for the rest of the next few years. And if that pressure goes above the 300 pressure, then they'll have to do some sort of assessment if it meets 192.917.
So by running
3-4.
up to their MAOP, they're not having to do that type of assessment?
If they don't go above the, because they just reset their pressure at that highest point again,
Now, we're speaking of 192, 917?
917, yes.
Okay. And I think 917 talks about design and manufacturing threats, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And
So-
also the ERW.
And ERW. Mr. Clark, do you have something to add?
Yes, Mr. Nicholson, thank you very much. I want to stress that that's PG&E's interpretation of that statute. They did not come to us and ask us our opinion about that. And we're not in accord with that interpretation.
What is your interpretation?
Can you explain the differences in opinion between yourself and PG&E? Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, our interpretation is essentially that that the 5-year period started at the time that the high consequence area was designated. But having said that, the artificially raising the pressure in a pipe that has identified integrity seam issues seems to be a wrong-headed approach to safety. As to whether or not it would cause stresses on the pipe that would result in a fracture of the pipe, raising it incrementally once every 5 years is a matter for metallurgists to decide.
Oh, and I'll ask FEMSA to weigh in on this too. Ms. Doherty, could you speak to that?
I can respond, or perhaps Zach, he's...
The 619 sets the maximum allowable operating pressure, and there's nothing in the regulations that prevents the company from raising the pressure up to the maximum allowable operating pressure every 5 years. The integrity management rule under 917 just sets triggers for when the seams would be considered unstable, and it would trigger assessment through an integrity management plan. So the raising the pressure to the 5-year high MOP is about setting that trigger that if you go over that, that triggers assessments for any seams on that pipeline that have not been pressure tested. If there's been a pressure test on the seams, be it DSAW seams or be it ERW seams, we consider those stable. If there's a pipe that has not had a pressure test, then those seams, if you exceed the high 5-year prior to the identification of the HCA pressure, then that makes those seams unstable, and you have to assess those seams either by pressure test or by inline inspection tool, depending on which would be the best technology to address those seams at the time.
So, again, by running up to MAOP, they don't have to assess those threats. If they run their line up to that highest pressure every 5 years, and they are sure they'll never exceed that
If
pressure.
that's the highest pressure that they saw in the 5 years prior to the identification of HCA, that would be correct.
Continuing with yesterday's discussions, Ms. Doherty, PG&E management team mentioned some joiners that may have made up the short section of PUPs in the 1956 line 132 relocation. I was just wondering, does FEMSA have a concern over joiners or the use of joiners?
I am not aware of any data we have on joiners. I think that's an area that we do need to do some further exploration. It has not come up before, to my knowledge, so we'll need to find out if it indeed is an issue and how it can be identified and addressed.
Mr. Clark, do you have anything to add? No.
No, thank
Mr. Barrett, going back to the 5-year MAOP or the 5-year pressure increase, can you tell me how long the pressure has to be held?
The regulation doesn't specify a time frame for holding the pressure. It just says the operating pressure experienced in the previous 5 years of the identification of the HCA.
Ms. Doherty, does PHMSA track a number of miles of pipeline that are capable of being pigged?
We have some information to that. I'm trying to recall whether it is submitted. I don't think we have any specific data. We have more voluntary submitted information, and I don't know what those numbers are. I suspect that's your next question. I can check and see what we do have available and supply it to you later for the record.
Is that a concern of PHMSA? How many miles of pipe cannot be inspected internally?
You know, I think that, yes, we would like to know that. I think that we need to acknowledge there are various ways that pipelines can be assessed. Hydrostatic testing, internal inspection. There are different risks, and different tools and assessment methods may best suit the type of threats and risks. But definitely, we would like to see more lines piggable.
And you mentioned pressure tests as one of those options. Can you tell us the rationale behind the PHMSA requirement for pressure and duration under hydro tests versus what is called the grandfather clause, which essentially requires no pressure testing of a line?
In general, I can tell you that when the rules were promulgated back in 1968 and 1970, well, let me back up for a second. If you look at pipe mile statistics, you'll note that about 50% or so of pipelines were constructed post-war in the 1950s and 1960s. So when the regulations, the federal pipeline safety regulations, were developed in 1968 and 1970, those lines were fairly new. And so when they looked at whether they would require operators to have those records before they could use, where they could rely on those records to establish MAOP, or whether they had to go out and hydrostatically test, they were looking at for the most regard, newer lines. And so I think at that time, the decision was made to accept the 5-year interval prior to the implementation of the rule, rather than requiring fairly new lines to be hydrostatically tested.
And does PHMSA have a position as to whether this is still a valid practice that should be allowed?
We believe it's a very good question. We are now a ways down the road, and we need to revisit whether the grandfathering clause is still appropriate or whether additional means need to be taken.
And Mr. Clark, I'll ask you, General Order 112 came out in 1961. Did that require hydro tests of lines?
Yes, it did.
Okay. And with that, I'll conclude and pass this on to Mr. Trainer. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Lee, I'd like to go back to a question posed to you at the beginning of the panel. You were describing for Mr. Nicholson how CPUC conducted its integrity management audits. Pardon me. And you mentioned the PHMSA protocol and going through checklists, files, and records. And you also commented that you review program procedures. And that's what I'd like you to expound upon. How do you exactly review program procedures? Do you simply look at the written procedure? Do you make an effort to see them in action, or something else? Would you explain, please?
Oh, we look at the, basically what's provided is a matrix that PG&E would provide to us, or any utility company would provide to us. This matrix would include the protocol in one column, and then the next column would include where in their procedures that they meet this protocol. And so we go through their procedures to make sure everything that's written in their procedures are what's in the protocol. And we look at the procedures, and then after that, we look at project files to make sure that they are following those procedures.
Okay. I guess I still am concerned that reviewing records and files and protocols is whether that's going to give you the entire picture. Do you talk to employees about the implementation of these protocols? Do you Do you talk to managers about their review and assessment process of these protocols?
Oh, yes, we interview the folks that are in charge of certain parts of their plans.
And are these, the requirement to do interviews and this type of thing, are those specified in the PHMSA protocols for conducting an audit?
No, it's not in the plan, but for them to tell us what's in the procedures, they can clearly explain who's in charge of the plan, who does the revisions, where records are at.
Do you interview people and question them about how they execute these protocols?
Oh, yes.
Okay. I've got a lot of ground to cover here. I'd really like to spend more time on it, but we are limited. You'd also mentioned problems with the 2010 audit involving a third-party contractor, and you said there were concerns about that, using that contractor. Could you be more specific? What were your specific concerns?
Oh, basically, PG&E hired a third-party contractor in 2007 to look over their ILI, or inline inspection process and their program, and look at their ECDA process and program. And the third-party consultant found some deficiencies, either in their plans or the way they ran their process. And we didn't have the CPUC, we didn't have a clear picture of when they actually implemented these deficiencies that were found by the third-party contractor.
Can you identify the specific deficiencies they noted?
Basically, it's strengthening their procedures, including certain things that should have been in the procedures. I don't recall exactly what it was.
Or we may ask the commission to send us any correspondence that relates to that audit.
Sure, I can send you the two internal audits that were conducted.
Ms. Harrigan, you were talking about the frequency of conducting audits on transmission pipeline systems, and you stated that you'd like to do them more frequently, but haven't been able to. Would you explain that remark, please?
Well, certainly since the incident in San Bruno, we'd like to be able to audit the transmission integrity management program much more frequently, every year if we could. As you know, we did an initial audit along with PHMSA in 2005, and then we got back to PG&E's integrity management program in 2010. Those are the only two we've done. We haven't yet concluded our 2010 audit in the sense that we've given PG&E our findings, but because of the intervening the situation in San Bruno and this investigation, we haven't yet been able to dedicate staff to working with PG&E to resolve those findings to our satisfaction. So while we'd like to be able to do more audits, we haven't been able to.
Are there any discrepancies from previous audits that are more than two years old that remain outstanding?
Not that I'm aware of.
Are there?
No, we typically, the staff works very hard when they do an audit to close out any findings and make sure that any violations in particular are resolved before they close out that audit.
Okay. Mr. Barrett, your work at PHMSA involves dealing with state programs. Would you explain the process that PHMSA has, whatever process you have, towards evaluating the effectiveness of state programs? Could you run through that process for us?
Sure. Can you hear me now? Yeah, thanks. We have a evaluation form, evaluation program that we have developed through the years from working with stakeholders such as the NAPSR members through the years. There's a grant allocation committee that helps populate the questions on what a pipeline safety, a good pipeline, state pipeline safety program or a pipeline safety program should have. We also, there on that evaluation form, there's actually 4 recommendations from NTSB, you know, dealing with cast iron and dealing with emergency response. So we take into consideration from all of our stakeholders what should be in that form. Annually, my staff goes out to each state and does an on-site an evaluation running through that form to check inspection procedures, inspector training, investigation procedures, damage prevention efforts, their alignment with PHMSA's inspection programs and initiatives, enforcement, follow up on enforcement issues and actions. And also they do an on-site field investigation where they actually go out with a pipeline safety inspector and review that pipeline safety inspector performing a portion of an audit and of a pipeline during their program evaluation. We also review information that is provided to us by states dealing with their safety authority, the amount of jurisdiction they have, the amount of recommended person days that they're able to accomplish during inspections, their ability to adopt our pipeline safety regulations, and several other factors that we include in that scoring. Based on that score and the availability of the funding that we have, we basically distribute the pipeline safety grant to states, you know, based on those scores and those performance evaluations of how well that they're doing.
Okay, I believe the PUC responded that they had received scores of 100 from PHMSA in past years.
I think Rich was responding to the program evaluation piece of the score. I think they were like 99.5 in the last evaluation that we did and 99 the year before. In prior years, they were at 100. The certification piece is tied in with the score, so there's a combined score. They don't have full jurisdiction authority over municipals, some master meters, some private operators, so they lose points for that. Also, their inspection person years have not met the minimum recommended standard for a year or so, and so they've lost points for that also. So I believe their combined score is somewhere around 90 in that.
And how does that compare to other state programs? Is it better than average, below average? Average?
It's, you know, I would say that the California PUC has a good inspection program. They have good qualified engineers. They're quite capable of doing inspections and investigations, you know, with most programs. Where they're taking the hits is because of their jurisdictional status. The legislation hasn't given them authority over all pipelines that are there, and for not also hitting the, so that's putting them a little below average in that 90 score, their total aggregate score, but that's reflective of not being able to get legislation.
All right, what was their total aggregate score?
I believe it's 90.
And what is the maximum total aggregate score?
100.
100. Your assessment of the commission's program, is that just for the authority delegated to them to enforce federal pipeline safety standards for distribution systems, for example? Does your assessment cover intrastate pipeline systems? Their program for intrastate pipeline systems?
Interstate pipeline systems? Intrastate. Yes, sir. Our program reviews their inspection and enforcement over intrastate pipelines, which are included in distribution systems often.
Okay, thank you. Going back to the scoring system again. What's been the lowest score ever given to any state program?
I'd have to do some research for you on that and get back for the record.
All right.
I'm not sure.
Would it be below 50, for example, or above that?
I haven't seen anything below
Okay.
50. To kind of expand upon that, we've been evaluating states in the pipeline safety since 1971. So we've been trying to, obviously, our goal is to get states to score as high as possible, because that means that they're meeting, they're aligning their programs with and they're meeting the mandates that we have out there. So most pipeline safety programs score in the high 90s.
What challenges do you see as, in your position, facing the state utility commissions in terms of their being able to develop and implement effective pipeline safety programs?
I think resources are always an issue, especially with the economic conditions that we're dealing with right now. Many states have had to undergo furloughs of state inspectors. Some states are having trouble holding on to their staff, their current staff. We suspended a management of effort clause that allowed us to give states more pipeline safety funding to help shore up states, hopefully that governors would recognize that these are positions that we're paying for through the grant, and that they would not furlough those employees or keep those furloughed employees on the clock. So I believe that's a challenge. Also, in some of our states where they're producing states, where the industry is doing well, and where our engineers are getting up to speed, and they have good backgrounds and good talents, the industry is robbing, basically cultivating that good talent to go to work for them, because their salaries are higher. So that's also a challenge, I think, to hold good state pipeline safety employees that are well-trained, that have years of experience. I think those are two of the main challenges that we face. Obviously, we're continuing to learn. We're continuing to try to improve state programs. Feedback from sessions like this will help us go back and take things to look at for our evaluation form.
Mr. Metro, I would ask you the same question. What are the greatest challenges in your mind facing the state public utility commissions?
I would echo Mr. Barrett's comments about the state programs, that funding is a considerable concern for the states. Consistent funding over the years is a problem because each state has had economic downturns. The funding levels have been over the last 5 years anywhere from 40% to 64%. It's hard for state programs to budget and go out and say, okay, over the next 3 years, I know I'm going to get a certain amount of grant from PHMSA. I'm going to be able to go out and hire 2 or 3 additional engineers. Because the funding levels are bouncing up and down, it's very difficult for the states to plan how they're going to spend this money in the long run. So that's a difficulty that the states are looking at.
Okay. Mr. Clark, I would ask you that same question relative to the conditions in California. What are your greatest challenges with respect to your pipeline safety program?
Again, resources. It's a resource issue in an industry whose history has been relatively safe, very safe actually, and to be able to convince folks that in competition for positions across state government at this point in time and in the past, in terms of the economic conditions that folks are suffering, that it's important to have inspectors be sure that the utilities know what's in the ground and look very deeply and broadly at what it is that they're doing with their systems, when those systems are first buried under the ground so no one sees them, they don't even know that they're running through their neighborhoods. And number two, they have a very high safety record. It's very difficult to convince folks that we need resources sometimes.
In light of this environment, we're states as well as the federal government are all in a very severe budget predicament, obviously. I would pose the question to Mr. Metro, Mr. Barrett, Ms. Doherty, and Mr. Clark again. What types of things could operators and regulators do to make the best of the situation? And I'll give you one example. Accepting the fact that increased funding is probably a remote possibility, are you examining more effective uses of your resources? And if you are, explain how that might be done. Mr. Metro?
Yes, in Pennsylvania, about 5 years ago, we realized that we were going to have funding issues. And we didn't have the resources that we needed to do the job the way we wanted to do it. So we implemented a risk assessment program where we went out and mined our data that we had and said, okay, where can we put the resources that's going to give us the biggest bang for the buck and reduce reportable incidents, reduce noncompliance. And we implemented that, and we've seen some very good results with that. We've seen the number of reportable incidents decrease. We've seen the number of noncompliance issues initially increase, and some have decreased, and that number is going back and forth. But we believe that a risk assessment program for inspections is the way to go at this point.
And I would agree with Mr. Metro. In our evaluation form, we've actually been trying to drive states towards risk assessment, risk prioritization of their inspection units, their operators to inspect. We're also working to share data better amongst ourselves in the states and to learn more from the data that we have. As Paul said earlier, we're trying to run the data to try to look for trends, look for information that could be helpful to target inspection efforts.
I would agree with everything that has been said. I would also mention, I was surprised it didn't come up when we were talking about constraints and challenges. We have rolled out an incredible number of new regulations over the last decade. Control room management, distribution integrity management. We have operator qualifications. States with small staffs have to absorb these new regulations, so it takes an intense amount of training, so it's a burden. So bringing all the states up to speed is also a challenge. One of the ways that we are trying to mitigate that is to leverage each other's resources and skills. You had asked, ways we can overcome without more money, funding the states, without growing those programs. How can we achieve good safety results? And one of the ways that we can do that is utilizing our data, identifying the highest risks, helping each other out, identifying where the feds do an inspection of an operator that a state may also have regulatory authority over, maybe they can use our results. There are ways that we can enhance and improve safety, but it is a challenge.
Is any of that work commenced at this point?
Yes, I mean, we recognize we had these issues years ago, and we have made an effort to share information, to improve our information exchange, and we're not there yet. We have a lot of work to do, but we are trying to help each other as partners. We serve the public. We work together to protect the public as best as we can, and by helping each other, we reach that goal.
Thank you. And Mr. Clark.
We're taking a multifaceted approach. First of all, we're not giving up on the conversation of what the adequate resources are in order to ensure a higher level of safety in the gas systems. We're having robust discussions across the state in that regard. But we've undertaken a rulemaking at the commission where we're taking a look essentially at the rate-making aspects. We're taking a look at the prescriptive rules, and we're also taking a look at the performance-based safety approach, so that we can have a comprehensive system, if you will, that will more adequately ensure a higher level of safety amongst the gas operators in the state of California. Another aspect of what we're doing is we've undertaken a rulemaking to determine whether or not the mobile home parks, where we spend a considerable amount of time doing inspections, whether or not those master metered mobile home parks should be, in fact, absorbed by the utilities instead, so that the utilities are responsible for the safety of those systems rather than each owner of each particular master metered mobile home park having to have a trained and qualified operator and having to know how the system works and the whole 9 yards. It is a huge challenge for us, however, to implement the distribution integrity management, the transmission integrity management, and all that sort of thing. But we are taking a comprehensive approach. We're also, in terms of sharing data, we have very good information in our databases built by our engineers who also do the inspective work. And we're looking at ways that we can bring that data together to be able to trend going out, looking into the future. We've recently begun trending going out into the future so we can more target our investigative and inspective efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. We have about 5 minutes left. I'll give the balance of time back to Mr. Chatry and Mr. Nicholson.
Thanks. I have a question both for Ms. Doherty and Mr. Lee. Yesterday, PG&E told us that when the information is not available, or is unknown, they are taking quote-unquote most conservative values. My question to both of you as regulators is, if the material in itself is unknown, what is the most conservative value? I'll start with you, Mr. Lee.
So can you restate that, please?
Okay. Yesterday, during the interviews, PG&E told us that on their sheets, when the information is not available or is unknown, they take quote-unquote most conservative value. And my question is, if an operator does not know what kind of pipe they have in the ground, what is the most conservative value?
Yes, that was actually before the San Bruno incident, and yeah, after the fact, or in light of the San Bruno event, it's different now. That would change.
I don't believe you answered my question, but I'll go to Ms. Doherty if PHMSA has any.
In a situation where a pipeline operator does not know what they're dealing with, the general premise that you need to be conservative is kind of obvious. If you don't know what you have, you must choose the most conservative value. Now, having said that, identifying what that actually means would be challenging. You might look at what available information is out there, what it might likely mean, but as was mentioned yesterday, you would need to add in another safety factor. There's nothing in the regulations that I'm aware of that would specifically state how you would get to that. We would expect an operator to provide a technical engineering justification on how they arrived at that decision. So it's not a simple thing of saying, well, we're just going to assume we have this value. No, you must provide why you arrived at that value.
I'm going to still go to pursue because I don't believe I got answers from either of you. And my question is, if a person does not know what material they have in the ground, again, I'll repeat my question again, what is the most conservative value and how long they can keep doing that?
I'm not really sure how to answer that question. If someone does not know what they have in the ground, then they have to figure out a way of either determining what they have in the ground based on good technical engineering justification. Maybe they dig it up and examine it. Maybe they have other information that would allow them to apply a safety factor. But if you're looking for a value, I can't provide what a minimum value might be.
As the regulation states right now.
Correct.
Correct. and how long the regulation allows the operator to continue doing this. I mean, the way I look at PG&E line 132, almost 7 years pass by, and you still have unknown values in several areas.
I don't want to. What I
Mr.
would
Lee,
say
and
is
then-
on the federal lines, we would expect the operator to provide a technical justification. I can't speak to 7 years or however long. I would say if there is an unknown, they must be able to justify how they got to it.
So if I have a 30-inch pipe, I do not know I have bends in them, I do not know I have pups in them, and I do not know what material I have. To me, the most conservative value is probably the lowest grade steel. That comes in with the lowest seam weld factor. That comes in. And with all the lowest values. Has that been done, Mr. Lee, in line 132's case?
No, I don't believe so.
That's all for me. Thank you much. Mr. McNichols. Madam Chairman, the technical panel is done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chatra. We're going to take a 15-minute break, and we'll come back at 2:45.
I thought I answered that question.
Yeah, you did.